my name is Jamie, and today we are going to discuss a key historic figure in American colonial history, Robert Mursh, whose name was alternately spelled Mush and Marsh in various primary sources. Robert is one of the best documented members of the Pamunkey tribe in 18th century Virginia. Robert fought in the American Revolution and was involved in the siege of Yorktown. Virginia indigenous people, particularly indigenous men, have a long history as warriors and soldiers, being part of countless battles and conflicts before colonization. And as America was established, they were present in every war fought on this soil after colonization. Before we get into Robert's personal story, please keep in mind that documentation of 18th century Virginia tribal history is regrettably sparse. Many of the tribes lost their reservations by the 18th century, and these tribes ceased to be written about by the colonial government. So what we have to work off of is their personal tribal history rather than an official record. But even tribes that kept their land, as the Pamunkey did, appear scarcely in the official records because they owned no land individually, broke no laws, and oftentimes contracted no legal marriages in English terms. Robert Mursh is one of the few individuals that appears in official documentation. I mentioned that Robert was Pamunkey. The Pamunkey were a key tributary tribe in the Powhatan Paramount Chiefdom in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. They have one of the longest and most complicated histories with the colonial and later the state and federal governments as America was formed. They were present for every treaty signing in Virginia and were subject to every change in the law that restricted movement, status, social standing, and cultural identity for their people. Several Pamunkey people served in the American Revolutionary War, the results of which cut the Pamunkey and other Virginia tribes off from the English colonial government with which they had treaty relations. The new Commonwealth of Virginia did move in to fill that gap and work to protect rights Native people had been given by the English government in treaties. Unfortunately, the laws also had the effect of keeping Powhatan tribal lands a state, not federal reservations. Robert Mursh was born around 1758 at the Pamunkey Indian town in King William County, Virginia. As a young man in the late 1760s, Robert attended the Brafferton School at the College of William and Mary. The Brafferton was essentially a residential school. It was designed to educate Native youth in both academic subjects as well as in Christianity. These types of schools were created by colonist and colonial governments with the intention of providing what they deemed proper education for Native youth. In actuality, what these schools did was attempt to eradicate Native culture and identity and assimilate those that were different than the majority. So Robert's early life was shaped by his experience, both living with his tribal community as well as by what he learned at the Brafferton School. By the year 1776, Robert enlisted in the 15th Virginia Regiment and was deployed to Middlebrook, New Jersey. There are a few key wartime experiences recorded about his time in the Continental Army. He and his unit wintered with George Washington at Valley Forge. He marched to Charleston, where he and about 5,500 American soldiers were taken prisoner. He was held in a prison barge in Charleston Harbor for 14 months before being brought to Jamestown Island for a prisoner exchange. He was then repatriated back to the newly formed American government in 1781. Robert then re-enlisted in the Virginia regiments as Cornwallis and his British forces dug in at Yorktown. The Marquis de Lafayette, who commanded the American troops in Tidewater, Virginia, ordered Mursh and over 100 other exchanged soldiers to reinforce a unit on the James River. Robert was present when the French fleet arrived in the Chesapeake Bay and was among 16,000 American troops that marched to Yorktown to fight, and then eventually watched Cornwallis surrender to Washington. Robert marched to Georgia for multiple cleanup skirmishes before being discharged from the Army in 1782. When he returned back to Virginia and the Pamunkey tribe, Mursh married a Pamunkey woman named Elizabeth, and they started a large family. He and his wife converted to Christianity, and Robert soon decided to become a Baptist minister. They relocated to what was called Indian Land in South Carolina around 1800, settling with the Catawba Nation. Robert founded a church and school while in South Carolina, and around 1818 he applied for and received a pension for his service. When he passed away in 1837, his story continues in the struggles of his wife Elizabeth. The federal government denied her a widow's pension because their first marriage was not considered legal. Robert and Elizabeth were first married according to the traditions of their tribe. Then some years later, after their first few children were born, they were married according to the Christian faith. It took her 12 years to establish the legality of her tribal marriage and get the decision reversed. Robert may not have gained notoriety in his time, but his story can teach us a great deal about the American story and about the experience of Indigenous Americans in the 18th century. His life was very much the product of a forced convergence of cultures and societal institutions that formed as a result of colonization. Because he and his widow applied for pension, we know more about his life than we do about thousands of other Virginia Indian peoples in this century. His story also had significant impact on his tribe because it was one of the documented cases of their continued resilience and legacy used in gaining state and federal recognition. Robert's story is also a great reminder that you can't learn everything you want to know about a person through official documentation. What is missing from Robert's story is what his personal life experience was like. What did he experience while living with his tribe? Did he learn traditional Pamunkey skills and values? Was he a hunter and fisherman, as were many other men in his tribe? What was his motivation for joining the army or becoming a minister? Unfortunately, we will never know the answers to these questions, but we are grateful to have some of his story available to us today. We hope that you enjoyed learning about Robert Mursh's story. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future videos you would like to see, please leave them below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more great 17th and 18th century videos.